if you want to step into entrepreneurship, it's not easy. It really isn't easy. I always laugh about this. I'm like, somebody said, oh, go into an entrepreneur, you'll never work a day in your life. And I'm like, I have never worked harder in my life than I do now. But if you have something that you love and it fuels you, then you build that discipline. The struggle days are a little bit easier because you do have that sort of passion that's fueling you, that's driving you. And then you don't have to have it all figured out, because God knows I did it when I got started. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew the space that I was stepping into. You as nurses, we have quite a lot of skills, the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are transferable if you think about it. And so it's just figuring out where you want to land and what your true purpose is, what your mission is.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the You Belong in Here podcast. This is a podcast where we explore the intersection of nursing and racism, racial disparities that African Americans face in healthcare, as well as the inequities that African American nurses, doctors, and nurse practitioners face in the workplace. My name is Dr. Tiffany C. Brown, and I am your host. I am a doctoral level nurse practitioner with more than 23 years of practice in the nursing profession. It is my hope that through hearing the personal stories of triumph and resiliency shared through in-depth interviews from nurses, nurse practitioners, doctors, and DEI experts, you will be empowered in your workplace and know that you belong in here. Now, let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of You Belong in Here podcast. As you know, I am Dr. Tiffany C. Brown, your host, and I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered what it's like to start your own wine business? If so, this is an episode for you. I am so thrilled to introduce you to my guest for today's episode, and I titled it Pouring Passion, a Nurse's Journey to Wine Entrepreneurship. So our guest has not only followed her passion in nursing, but has leveraged her nursing background to create a unique and impactful wine business. So Dr. Chris Wachira is a serial entrepreneur with an almost 2-decade history of bridging the equity divide by driving minority equity and access. Her commitment to leveling out playing fields is beyond passion. Dr. Chris's clinical career spans over 15 years, spent in neurosciences at Stanford Healthcare, and she holds a doctorate in nursing from the University of San Francisco. As a global health strategist, she served as the executive director of the Institute for Clinical Excellence. She also served as a fellow of the Stanford Center for Innovation in Global Health. Now, in 2021, Dr. Chris transitioned from corporate healthcare to global health consulting to running the Wachira group of companies, which include Wachira Wines, the first Canadian American winery in the U.S., to SoCo Distributors, the first Black-owned and woman-owned distributor, importer, exporter of wine, beer, and liquor license in California. And lastly, the Caribou by Wachira, the first Black-owned and woman wine tasting room in Alameda County. So let's just give it up for Dr. Chris. So welcome. Thank you for coming on with me today, Dr. Chris.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you for having me. And I wouldn't be real if I didn't start at the top, right?
That's right.
It's Wachira.
Wachira. Thank you for correcting me. Please correct me because I'm saying Wachira. No, Wachira. All right. Wachira. Yes. So let's start about, a little bit like I call your genesis. So tell us about your career beginnings and actually why you chose to become a nurse to start.
To be honest with you, nursing kind of fell on my lap in a sense. So I was born and raised in Kenya, and my mother, my grandmother, my grand-aunts, they're all nurses. So in different levels, right? My grandmother was like what the equivalent of a nurse practitioner. My grand-aunt was a nurse practitioner in pediatrics. So I grew up around nurses and having those sort of healthcare nursing conversations around the dinner table. But to be honest, I didn't want to be a nurse. So I did everything else. Nursing was sort of a career that I came into once I migrated to the US. And it was sort of my comfort zone because when I moved from the place where I was really comfortable, from where I knew how to and how I could move and shape shift, when I moved to the States, I discovered all these little inequities certainly a lot of hindrances, things I couldn't be X number of things. I was a flight attendant before I moved to the States. I traveled the world. But when I moved here, I could not transition to just being a flight attendant again. And so I think I fell back to what was familiar and what was comfortable. That being said, nursing had this value in my family, my upbringing, and about taking care of others, caring about those who are vulnerable, those who are sick, and giving back. And so that for me it was very familiar and it was very comfortable. So that's partially why I became a nurse, because I wanted to fit in, take care of others, serve others, and be like my mother's daughter.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because that's a lot of reason why most of us even become nurses anyway. A lot of times we have a little bit of exposure that
Right.
creates this curiosity. And then
Right.
even though, you sounds like you didn't plan for this. So
Right.
I like to say nursing for me at least is a calling, right?
There you go.
But you were called into it to a certain aspect in some kind of
Mhm.
way, a little whisper, you were called into it. So,
Mhm.
but now we're going to navigate a little bit more about how that goes into wineries, right? Like in
Mhm.
that entrepreneurship. So I read a statistic very interesting. We already know that within nursing, we're minorities, right?
Yeah.
And having your doctorate as a woman, we're like less than 1% or within the 1% of African Americans who are even in nursing and nursing leadership as far as
Mhm.
African Americans that have their doctorates, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
interestingly, that same 1%, it's like the same thing for wineries. So research tells us that Black owned wineries represent less than 1% of the approximately 11,000 wineries in the US. And
Mhm.
of course, that number is even smaller when you talk about specifically Black women. So, can
Absolutely.
you share your journey a little bit from nursing to becoming a wine entrepreneur? And what inspired this transition?
It's twofold. For me, winemaking, I love the science of wine. And having that sort of clinical background, and at the time towards 2015, when I started playing around with crafting wines, I was starting looking at analytics and clinical outcomes research, and how to fill gaps, identify gaps, and step into gaps, and create solutions for optimizing outcomes. And so that the wine industry was very fascinating to me. I needed to figure out like how Cabernets, for example, from different wineries are so different, like just based on one the crafter's perspective, the style of the winemaker's style of crafting, what side of the hill the grapes are harvested from. So those little tidbits about wine were really fascinating to me. But the other part about it too is my heritage, is the fact that having been Kenyan born, and my mother creating or cooking these dinners on Sundays, family dinners, and me bringing bottles of wine to to pair, because once you live in California, you got to have wine with your meals, right? So I'd bring home bottles of wine to share, and just not finding a wine that perfectly complemented or paired with my mother's food. Being in the gap solver, the gap identifier, I was like, okay, there's a gap here. I don't see my palate reflected in this space. So let me try craft a wine for her. And initially it was purely to craft a wine to complement her food. And I started playing around with these blends, brought home some wines to pair. Then I tested them on friends and tested them on family members. And then we started doing pop-ups in Jack London in Oakland. And the rest, as they say, is her story. Because once we had the market said tasting them and sampling them, and folks loved them. So I realized we are onto something. We do have something here. So it was purely, I always say it was purely selfish. I started this for a customer base of one. I wanted to do something that would work for me, that would complement the food that I was eating. Because the one thing I absolutely love, is Kenyan food.
Well, that's such a beautiful, unique perspective. Not only are you, trying to do something for yourself, for your family, like as far as bringing that in, but you are a scientist as well. So that's in a sense where that nurse scientist type of study research that the brain, how our brain works, we're
Yeah.
like, what? We like molecular molecules and chemistry and all that kind of stuff, and say, how can this work? So I was going to ask you a question about how do you feel your nursing background like helped you approach running this business, particularly, opening a wine lounge and But I'm almost answering the question, but I still want to hear from you.
Not me. Yeah. So I mean, there are multiple things, and if you think about nursing, like we're so multifaceted, right? So we not only have the sort of that science background, the curiosity, that initiative, the drive. We are very resourceful. We are resilient, and we're also very attentive. And when it comes to like dealing with people and serving the wines and getting feedback from folks, is that empathy? Is that self awareness? Is that attention to detail? All those things that a nurse has to be makes me, I guess, great at what I do.
So you bring all of that and compound it, and you put it all in a bottle. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, lady.
I'm not mad at it. So I've been to your wine lounge, and let me tell you, folks, if you have not been to Wachira Wine Lounge in Alameda, you definitely have to go. It's such a beautiful place and space, and I feel very connected in at home when I go there. So tell us rather about the concept and what motivated you to open this particular lounge in this particular location.
So crafting with Shira wines was one thing, right? So and would do all these pop-ups in festivals and in open spaces. Well, this was all pre-pandemic. The pandemic sort of shifted that when we had to pivot. A lot bulk of our market went on e-commerce. Then post-pandemic, we wanted to have a home for just not just for Wachira wines, but for other makers like myself. Because when I stepped into the industry, what I recognized real quick was the gap wasn't just in my palate not being reflected; it was also in the level of inequity when it came to women makers and Black women makers at that, and also small batch makers. And so I wanted to have a space that would allow Wachira wines to have a home, but also showcase other makers who were sort of in those buckets that I just mentioned. And seeing, how the market received our wines and how everybody was sort of excited to learn about, a Black woman in wine. I wanted to create a space that allowed another woman to show up that way too and call that space her home. And so that's I put it together. It was my COVID baby, and we built the space together with my family, my husband, my brothers, and a group of really close friends during the pandemic, most of the pandemic. I built it to feel like my living room. Like I wanted folks to walk in and feel like I'm welcoming them into my home. And it's called Caribou for a reason, because Caribou means welcome in Swahili. And I wanted folks to feel they're in a space that allowed them to just be. Whether you're an expert in wine or you're new to wine, I wanted you to have a space where you could explore wine and have an adventure without feeling judged or like you have to meet certain criteria to be in a wine tasting room.
I love it. Yeah, and I definitely feel all of that when I go there. And you mentioned a couple of things, about equity and Black women, particularly being in this industry, right? So we already know, that Black women really are making strides, not only just in the wine industry, but in building an entrepreneurship, period, right?
Right,
But,
right.
systemic barriers and lack of access to resources, it continues to be a challenge, right? We don't get the same money, right?
Mhm,
But I did read this article in particular. It was
mhm.
a 2020 article, actually during the pandemic, of Black wine entrepreneurs, which 78% identify as female. And 1 in 5 responded cite racism and bias as the number one obstacle to growing a business. So
Right.
share with our viewers, share with those who need to hear this, right?
Mhm.
What challenges did you face as a Black entrepreneur in the wine industry? And then tell us how you overcame them, or maybe you're still overcoming some of them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's honestly it's present continuous, right? Because again, I stepped into an industry where that was not built or designed for people like me, even if we're being honest, right? So culturally, economically, or even institutionally, so we don't have access to the networks, to the capital, or just to visibility, right? A lot of what I've learned in this space is it's who you know, because I source my grapes, right? So I buy my grapes from farmers, so I have to know which farmers are selling, and that's not information you can Google. Maybe today you can Google, but when I got started, you had to know certain people. Somebody had to to walk you through where do you source your barrels from, where do you get the barrels from, where do you get bottles from, where do you get corks from, who's the most economically feasible person to make your labels, to print your wine labels. Those little things, it actually adds up. And because we're in a space that where we're not traditionally exposed to, we don't have a lot of this information. And so that sort of that level of gatekeeping or institutional gatekeeping, that hurt. And then economically, we are not. I don't have access to the funding. Again, Black women are the fastest group of entrepreneurs in the country, right? We open the largest number of businesses, but we also have the largest number of businesses that fail, and that's because of funding. And a lot of times you find grants where you have a grant for $100,000, but that grant is being spread between, I don't know, 50,000 people. When you're being financed or funded, but the funding is really not to facilitate your dream, is more to just check a box. And so those are some of the challenges that I have. But what I've built is figuring out how to, tap into some of those networks. And when I do that, I bring somebody else along. I make sure that door is open, is left open wide enough for somebody else to make it through. And then I create tables for, if for example, like Soko distributors, we founded that company to help us get our products to market because we couldn't get people to the large scale distribution companies are not interested in a small batch crafter with a strange name from a healthcare background. I didn't come from a traditional wine family. And so the Soko distributors filled that gap. It helped us get our wines onto shelves, but what it also did is it's created a pathway for others who, like myself, are women, folks of color, and small batch crafters. So it allows us to get those products to markets across California and some around the country. And then Caribou does that too, right? Is that table I created that allows small batch crafters and Black women crafters to have a tasting room that they can call their own to showcase their products. So that's how I do it. I create my own tables.
I love it. I've said before in other episodes that, well, I think who did I interview? Whether it was Carter, I can't remember which guest I had. And we talked about how we have to create our own table when there isn't one for us.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that takes a lot of courage, right? And it takes a lot of grit and it takes resilience. Like we have it within us to be such resilient people.
Right.
What do we do? Like I would ask you over 10 years of working on this, what do you do when you're weary, right? Like, how do you go back and say, I did this. I'm a little tired right now, being resilient. What do you do when that happens?
And right now, as we speak today, right now, I'm a little tired.
Yeah.
I'm a little tired, man. Every day is present. Like I said, it's present continuous. It doesn't stop, right? And I surround myself. My family is my absolute why. And as long as I'm grounded, they keep me grounded. They keep me, like I know the reason why I get up every morning and I continue to show up is because I know who I am for, who has my back, and who stands with me. And as long as I have that in my corner, I am good. I
I
am
love
good.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said something just now about your family being your why,
Yes.
which just clicked in my brain. My pastor, Dr. Darius Daniels, will give him a shout out. He said something about your why, like he's a businessman as well. If
Mhm.
your why doesn't make you cry, maybe not even like physical tears,
Mhm.
but what I mean by that is like the passion behind it that's within the heart,
Mhm.
then it's
Mhm.
not strong enough. You won't do it. You
Yeah.
won't complete it. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And to be honest with you, I give myself grace. I do give myself grace because I also recognize that I'm in a space where I'm still learning. I'm continuously learning. I learn something new every day. Honestly, I have three different businesses in this industry, and I am growing every day, learning and being kind to myself. Honestly, and then staying grounded in my values.
Now, where do you see, the wine lounge in Alameda continuing to? I know you said you're growing, right? You change
Mhm.
every day. Like,
Right.
how do you revamp this and see what works, what didn't work? Where do you see this wine lounge in the next 5 years?
So for me, the wine lounge is about how it serves the community. how it allows continues to create value and impact in our community. So as long as we have space where you walk in, if you walked in 2021 and you walk in 2025 and you still feel like you're welcome and it still feels like home, it still feels like my guest cellmate feels like a warm hug. So as long as you walk in there and you still feels that way, and I am still able to add value to your life, I'm able to bring programming in there, allow community gatherings. We host a lot of different engagements, whether it's entertainment, through music. We give a lot of artists, platform to showcase their music, to showcase their spoken word, to put their art on the walls and have, guests come in and view it as a gallery. So as long as I'm continuing to do that for my community, then the lounge is successful. That's because I sort of define my own success and what it means to me, and that's how I measure it. As long as I'm adding value, then we're being successful.
That almost makes me want to say amen. Like I was going to ask you, like, what role does diversity play in the wine industry? Of course, we know what we're trying to hope to influence. But even
Right.
as I was thinking about that, I don't know if you ever heard of this text that talks about, I believe, let me just say this. I
Hmm.
believe Black people, we're the seasoning of the earth, right? Like, so, what you're bringing, I would say this, with your wine
Hmm.
lounge, with Caribou, and just all of your industry is
Hmm.
seasoning.
Hmm.
You're bringing some flavor to that place.
And I mean, honestly, to be honest with you, you just hit on something, because I think about, as an immigrant, and right now it's a little rough out there being an immigrant, right? So when you think about what immigration does to the fabric of society, it's adding that extra step, that extra beat, that extra seasoning, right? Because the Wachira Wine Safari infuses the wine industry with something very unique, right? I was able to incorporate that African heritage in there, and be able to showcase the story of the highlands of Kenya through a glass of wine. So that sort of uniqueness in that is brought about by diversity, with different voices, and also the fact that, different palettes present differently. And I think the one thing that has been sort of the downside of the wine industry is it's been very monolithic in terms of palette, right? So though it's been guided, whatever the taste notes, the wines that are considered, classic wines, your go-to wines, it's been very monolithic in a sense. And we have a lot of palate differentiation in this space, because we, the consumers, are very different, right? And so you want the industry to be reflective of the consumer base, and that's what we
Absolutely.
do. It's the
Yeah.
seasoning.
It's the seasoning. With the salt of the earth. The salt of Alameda County is it's Caribou Wachira Wine Lounge. Okay.
Right.
I kind of want to bring it into healthcare a little bit because some people may be wondering, right? Like,
Hmm.
when I leave this to do that, what
Hmm.
happens to the nurse that's in me? What happens to the healthcare person that's in me on this
Hmm.
journey? So, like,
Hmm.
how do you envision? I know you were mentioned the community has a strong your aspects of giving back to the community. So, how do you envision expanding your impact within the industry and the healthcare community?
So what I have loved about being in this space, and is it's allowed me to focus on the healthcare causes that I really care about, right? That be very intentional about what I support and who I partner with and what I do in the healthcare space. For example, I do support the UCSF research, oncology research. I had a brother, I lost a sibling to colon cancer, and so I'm very passionate about, early education, early detection, and building community awareness around that. And so I do partner with, like UCSF, for example, around that. I support the Ronald McDonald House of Charities in all their work, and how they support the, families when a child is ill, and how they support the, bring the family members close to the child so the child can continue to get, ongoing care in hospitals. And we do that in Oakland, we do that in Palo Alto. So again, it has allowed me to get into a space where I can be very intentional about the causes that I support, and how I continue to work in that healthcare space. But then I also do some consulting work on the side. I do research consulting. I did a stint with the Department of Health, DHHS, last for 6 months. So I do some consulting.
Awesome. I love that you
Yeah.
are broadening the spectrum, as far as even in your space. Like what had come to me, because, I'm an oncology nurse practitioner,
Yeah.
is, as you were talking, I'm like, what, why hadn't I thought of that? Why had not we done some collaboration? I do some talks, especially to our Black community,
Yeah.
about some of the disparities. That's part of even what this podcast is about, right?
Mhm.
So there will be some collaboration in the future.
It, I'm looking forward to it. For me, my red line thread has always been building access. Awareness and access to whatever it is, healthcare, information, education, financial resources. However, I can create a pathway for folks who are underprivileged. More than happy to step into that space.
I know we're coming. We got a few minutes left. I do have a couple more questions for you, mostly about, as we get ready to close, like what advice would you give other healthcare professionals, particularly African American nurses, considering a career transition into entrepreneurship?
For one, is trust your gut. You got to go with something that you love and something that fuels you, right? If you want to step into entrepreneurship, it's not easy. It really isn't easy. I always laugh about this. I'm like, somebody said, "Oh, going to an entrepreneur, you'll never work a day in your life." And I'm like, I have never worked harder in my life than I do now. But if you have something that you love and it fuels you, then you build that discipline. The struggle days are a little bit easier because you do have that sort of passion that's fueling you, that's driving you, and then you don't have to have it all figured out, because God knows I didn't when I got started. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew the space that I was stepping into. You as nurses, we have quite a lot of skills, the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are transferable if you think about it. And so it's just figuring out where you want to land and what your true purpose is, what your mission is, and then find a mentor. Find somebody who has done something. It doesn't have to be the same exact thing that you've done. It has to be somebody who you can learn from. And learning comes from a lot of different avenues, right? I learned from my 12-year-old niece, the same way I learned from my 56-year-old mentor. When I'm in a space where I have a brand and a product that I want to have longevity, I have to think about what would she want when she's able to have an alcoholic beverage in 8 years or 9 years from now. So it's those kinds of things. So you learn from be open, be nimble, be willing to learn, and be willing to be mentored.
I love it. Those are some wonderful pearls, of wisdom to share with people. I want our listeners to know how to connect with you. I will add information, whatever you share with me in your in bio and links, but just tell us, even right now, before we get ready to close, how can our listeners connect with you to learn more?
The wachiragroup.com is sort of your one-stop shop because it has all the different entities, all co-located on that one platform. But if you're on social media, Wachira Wines on Instagram, Wachira Wines on Facebook. SoCo is the distribution company. It's on both platforms. I'm Dr. Chris Wachira on social media, on Instagram, but I'm also on LinkedIn. So that's a great way to connect with me. Reach out to me. I'm happy to partner, to collaborate. I love to learn. I'm a life student. I love to connect with people, especially around the causes that I'm really passionate about.
Well, thank you so much. Well, folks, this concludes another episode of You Belong in Here. Thank you, Dr. Chris, for being such an awesome, amazing guest. And also my friend, we both went to USAP,
Yes, I did.
sharing your inspirational, transformational journey. And I'm so proud to know you and blessed to have known it from the beginning. So, and see God work so much through your life.
Likewise.
Thank you, listeners, again for tuning in, and we hope that this episode reminds you that that your presence is necessary, that you truly belong in whatever avenue or workspace or schooling that you're in. And as usual, if you found this episode encouraging, motivating, inspiring, or empowering, like it, share it with others. You can find my podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So tune in 2 weeks where we continue to explore topics in equity in healthcare and equity in the workplace. Until then, keep pushing forward. Bye.
Bye-bye.